Hey there, friend. Grab a seat and maybe leave the lights on. Because boy, do I have a story that'll make your skin crawl and your mind reel. Ever made a pinky promise with your bestie? Well, let me tell you about two Viking buddies who took friendship pacts to a whole new level of yikes. Picture this. You're chilling with your ride or die, maybe sharing a horn of mead, because, Vikings. When suddenly your pal turns to you and says, "Hey, if I die, will you spend 3 nights in my tomb with my corpse?" I don't know about you, but I'd be spitting out my drink faster than you can say Odin's beard. But for our protagonists, Aswid and Asmund, this was just another Tuesday in Viking land. Now, before you start thinking these guys were a few axes short of a raiding party, let's dive into the wild world of Viking culture. These folks weren't just about cool helmets and longships, though let's be real, those are pretty awesome. They had this intense belief in fate, or wired, as they called it. Imagine living your life thinking every stubbed toe and spilled drink was preordained by the cosmos. Talk about pressure, right? This fatalistic worldview colored everything they did, from how they fought to how they partied, and boy did they party. But it also meant they took their oaths super seriously. We're talking, I'd rather die than break my word, levels of commitment. It's like if you promised to help your friend move, but instead of just lugging boxes, you had to follow them into the afterlife. Yikes on bikes! So, back to our dynamic duo, Aswid and Asmund. These two warriors were tighter than spandex on a superhero. They probably finished each other's sentences, had inside jokes for days, and maybe even braided each other's beards. Hey, no judgment here. But their friendship took a turn for the macabre when they made their blood oath. Now, I know what you're thinking. Hold up. Who in their right mind agrees to be buried alive? Well, my friend, welcome to the wonderful world of Viking loyalty. These guys didn't mess around when it came to their bros. It's like they took the best friends forever concept and cranked it up to 11, on steroids, while chugging energy drinks. Fast forward a bit and poor Aswid kicks the bucket. Moment of silence for our fallen Viking, please. Now Asmund's stuck between a rock and a hard place, or more accurately, between a corpse and a tomb wall. Does he honor the pact and potentially join his buddy in the great mead hall in the sky? Or does he chicken out and live with the shame of breaking a sacred oath? Spoiler alert. Our boy Asmund decides to go through with it. Talk about ride or die, am I right? But before we start planning Asmund's Friend of the Year parade, let's take a step back and ask ourselves, is this actually admirable or is it just plain crazy? I mean, on one hand, you've got to respect the commitment. How many of your friends would literally die for you? On the other hand, it's hard not to wonder if Asmund had been hitting the mead a little too hard when he made this pact. It raises some pretty heavy questions about the nature of loyalty and the value of individual life in Viking society. Was Asmund's choice truly heroic, or was it more like extreme peer pressure from beyond the grave? All right, buckle up, Buttercup, because things are about to get real dark. Remember that creepy haunted house you were too scared to enter at the county fair? Well, multiply that by about 1,000, and you might start to get a sense of what Asmund was in for. As the tomb sealed shut with a sound like the world's creepiest door slam, Asmund found himself in a situation that would make even the bravest Viking warrior wet their fur pants. Imagine being stuck in the world's worst escape room, where the only way out is to wait 3 days with your dead bestie. Oh, and did I mention the stench? Because, let me tell you, a decaying corpse doesn't exactly smell like a field of daisies. But wait, there's more. Because Vikings were all about that afterlife prep, they didn't just toss Aswid in there alone. Oh no, they gave him the full VIP treatment. Weapons, armor, his trusty steed, and even his loyal dog. It's like they were packing him for the world's most morbid camping trip. Now, I don't know about you, but being stuck in a dark, smelly tomb with a dead body would be bad enough. Throw in a confused horse and a probably very unhappy dog, and you've got a recipe for the world's worst slumber party. Can you imagine the noise? The horse shuffling around, the dog whining, and poor Asmund probably wishing he'd invested in some otherworldly noise-canceling headphones. As the hours ticked by, not that Asmund could tell, no windows in ye old tomb, things started to get really trippy. You know how you sometimes feel a little loopy after pulling an all-nighter? Well, multiply that by about 1,000,000. Studies have shown that even a short time in sensory deprivation can make people start hallucinating. Now imagine that, but you're also hanging out with your dead friend and some very unhappy animals. It's like the worst drug trip ever, except you can't even blame it on eating the wrong mushrooms. The psychological toll on Asmund must have been immense. I mean, we get antsy if our phone dies, and we can't check Instagram for an hour. This poor guy was facing days of darkness, silence, well, except for the increasingly distressed animals, and the growing realization that he might have made a teeny tiny mistake with this whole loyalty pact thing. It really makes you think about the ethics of these Viking burial practices. Sure, it was meant to honor the dead and hook them up for the afterlife, but at what cost? It's like the most extreme version of taking one for the team imaginable. It blurs the line between sacrifice and suicide in a way that's bound to keep ethicists arguing for centuries. Just when you thought things couldn't get any worse for our boy Asmund, the story takes a turn that would make even Stephen King say, "Whoa, that's messed up." Picture this. It's the third night of Asmund's tomb sleepover from hell. He's probably hallucinating, definitely smelling bad, and questioning every life choice that led him to this moment. Then, in the flickering light of whatever sad little lamp he brought along, he sees something that turns his blood to ice. Aswid, his dear departed friend, starts to move. Now, I know what you're thinking. Maybe it's just gas. Corpses do that sometimes, right? But nope, this is full-on, Night of the Living Dead level, undead action. Aswid's not just twitching. He's full-on rising up like he just heard the dinner bell ring in Valhalla. In Viking lore, they had this terrifying concept called a draugr. Think of it as the Viking version of a zombie, but cranked up to 11. These weren't your shambling, brainless Walking Dead extras. Draugr were said to be superhumanly strong, capable of shapeshifting, and had a real attitude problem. It's like someone took a Viking warrior, already pretty terrifying, and thought, you know what would make this worse? If it was dead and angry. So there's Asmund, trapped in a tomb with what used to be his best friend, and is now a supernatural killing machine. Talk about a friendship gone sour, right? It's like if your roommate turned into a hangry Hulk, but worse. The first thing undead Aswid does is turn on the animals in the tomb. Remember those loyal companions meant to accompany him to the afterlife? Yeah, they just became Viking zombie chow. There's a lot to unpack here symbolically. In Norse mythology, animals were often seen as guides to the afterlife. By chowing down on his furry friends, Aswid wasn't just having a post-death snack. He was severing his ties to the world of the living and fully embracing his new career as a supernatural terror. For Asmund, watching this go down must have been like the worst horror movie ever, except he couldn't cover his eyes or yell at the screen. This was his best friend, the guy he'd shared mead with, fought battles alongside, and made this crazy pact with. And now he was watching him turn into a monster straight out of his worst nightmares. It really makes you think about the nature of friendship, doesn't it? We all like to think our bonds are unbreakable, that we'd do anything for our friends. But what happens when that friend becomes something utterly alien and terrifying? It's like the ultimate test of loyalty, one that goes way beyond helping them move or picking them up from the airport at 3 a.m. All right, folks, strap in, because we're about to witness the most epic and tragic bro breakup in Viking history. Once undead Aswid finished his animal appetizers, he turned his glowing undead eyes on the main course, his old pal Asmund. Talk about awkward reunions, right? Now, Asmund's in a real pickle here. On one hand, this is his best friend, the guy he literally agreed to be buried alive with. On the other hand, said friend is now a supernaturally strong, flesh-eating monster who's looking at him like he's a walking all-you-can-eat buffet. It's like the world's worst episode of Friend or Foe. but with more rotting flesh and fewer commercial breaks. The fight that ensued was probably less epic battle and more desperate struggle for survival. I mean, Asmund had been chilling in a tomb for 3 days, probably hadn't had a decent meal or a wink of sleep, and was likely questioning his entire life choices up to this point. Meanwhile, undead Aswid had the strength of the supernatural on his side. Plus, he'd just had a protein-rich snack of horse and dog. Not exactly a fair fight, if you ask me. Imagine trying to fight your way out of a closet while wearing a blindfold and oven mitts. Now, make your opponent an undead Viking warrior with super strength. Yeah, it was that kind of bad news for Asmund. But here's where our boy Asmund proves he's not just a pretty face with questionable decision-making skills. In a move that would make any action movie hero proud, he manages to overpower undead Aswid, lop off his head, and stake him to the ground. It's like a Viking version of a zombie movie finale, but with 100% more beards and mead references. Now, before you start cheering for Asmund's victory, let's take a moment to consider the psychological toll this must have taken on him. This wasn't just some random Draugr he was fighting. This was Aswid, his best friend, the guy he'd shared battles and beers with. Imagine having to decapitate your bestie. That's the kind of thing that's going to lead to some serious therapy bills down the line. In Viking lore, decapitation and impalement were seen as ways to really truly kill a Draugr and stop it from coming back. So, in a way, you could argue that Asmund was actually doing his friend a solid. It's like the Viking equivalent of, if I ever turn into a zombie, promise you'll shoot me in the head. Asmund was freeing his friend's spirit from its monstrous form. A real bro move, if you think about it. But here's the kicker. In doing this, Asmund was also breaking their original pact. Remember, he was supposed to spend 3 nights in the tomb with Aswid's corpse. Nowhere in that agreement did it mention, unless said corpse turns into a murderous, undead monster. So, Asmund's basically caught between a rock and a hard place. Or, more accurately, between loyalty to a pact and not wanting to become Viking zombie chow. This whole situation raises some pretty heavy questions about the nature of loyalty and the limits of friendship. I mean, we've all had to let go of toxic friendships, but this takes it to a whole new level. Was Asmund right to fight back and save himself? Or should he have honored their pact, even if it meant becoming undead Aswid's post-mortem snack? It's not an easy question to answer, and I bet it kept Asmund up at night for years afterward. Assuming he ever managed to sleep again after this nightmare fuel of an experience, that is.